It started the day my brother flushed my science fair project down the toilet. I was 13. He was 15. The project was a model of a water purification system I'd spent 3 months building out of tubes, charcoal, and repurposed plastic. I'd stayed up nights, skipped video games, and even gave up a school trip just to finish it. My parents were proud. My teacher said it was one of the best she'd seen in years. But my brother? Nick just laughed. Said it looked like a pile of junk glued together by a desperate nerd. That night, while I was in the shower, he dismantled it, piece by piece, and stuffed the whole thing into the toilet. Mom screamed when the plumbing backed up. Dad grounded me for not keeping things where they belonged. Nick stood behind them, arms crossed, smug little grin on his face. And for some reason, I apologized. My name's Lucas, I'm 28 now, and I've spent most of my life cleaning up after my brother's messes, literally and figuratively. I'm not bitter. At least, I try not to be. But it's hard not to feel something when you're constantly the afterthought. The shadow. The cleanup crew. Growing up, it was always, Nick is so charismatic, or Nick makes friends so easily, or Nick's just a bit of a troublemaker. He doesn't mean it. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one. The fixer. The kid who got straight A's and still got told to be more fun, like your brother. Nick was the golden child. He had this way of turning every mess up into a joke. He could charm teachers out of detentions, talk his way out of chores, and always made sure someone else took the fall. Usually me. I remember once, in high school, he borrowed my laptop for a quick project. 2 weeks later, I got called to the principal's office because he'd hacked into the school's grading system with it. Somehow, even after they traced it to my account, he convinced them it was my idea. I was suspended for a week. When I confronted him, he just laughed. Dude, lighten up. You'll be fine. You always are. And just like that, I became the problem child, and he was the misunderstood genius with too much potential to waste. Despite everything, I still tried to maintain a relationship with him. Maybe it was loyalty. Maybe just habit. He was my brother, after all. And there were moments, brief ones, where I thought he might actually care. Like the time he drove all night to pick me up from college when my ride bailed. Or when he stood up for me at a party when someone started mocking my stutter. Those were rare, but they were enough to keep me hoping. Enough to make me ignore the manipulation, the lies, the endless emotional drain that came with being his brother. My parents weren't cruel, just blind. Especially Mom. She saw Nick through this permanent lens of nostalgia, like he was still the grinning 5-year-old with chocolate on his cheeks. Dad was a bit more grounded, but even he caved when Nick needed money just to get on his feet. Every time Nick burned a bridge, whether it was with friends, jobs, or landlords, our parents were right there, sweeping up the ashes. And me? I was just the background noise. The reliable one. The one who didn't need help, so didn't get it. By the time I hit 24, I'd graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering, started working at a sustainable design firm, and moved into a modest apartment downtown. I wasn't rich, but I was stable, independent. I had a couple friends, a decent bike, and a little bonsai tree I was oddly proud of. I didn't need much. I liked building things, solving problems, making things better. It brought me peace. It made me feel useful. Nick, on the other hand, had dropped out of 3 community colleges, burned through 4 jobs, and had 2 failed side hustles, one involving reselling sneakers and another that had something to do with cryptocurrency. He always talked big, always had some next big thing that was going to blow up. He lived in our parents' basement, smoked out the window, and still managed to convince them that he was just figuring things out. Then came the first real blow. At 25, I'd been quietly working on a project in my free time. Something personal. I'd had this idea back in college for a compact, solar-powered water filtration device that could be deployed in low-income areas or after natural disasters. Over time, I'd built a prototype in my garage, tested it, refined it, even entered it into a few innovation contests. I didn't talk about it much, not because I was secretive, but because it felt fragile. Like if I shared it too early, someone would find a way to tear it down. Someone like Nick. Of course, that didn't stop me from mentioning it one night during a family dinner. It was a small thing. Dad had asked if I was still playing around with those tubes and water pumps. I smiled, said yeah, and explained a bit about how the prototype was finally functional. Mom clapped her hands like I was 5 again. Oh, Lucas, that's so clever. Isn't that clever, Nick? And Nick, chewing a mouthful of lasagna, gave this little half laugh. Yeah, sounds cool, man. Like something from a sci-fi movie. I should have left it at that. But Dad, surprisingly interested, asked if I had pictures. So I showed them a few photos on my phone. Nick leaned over, nodded, and said, huh, you know, I bet you could make some serious cash if you pitched that right. Then he went back to his phone and didn't say another word. I didn't think much of it. Honestly, I was just glad he didn't make fun of it. A few weeks later, I went to submit my project to a startup incubator that offered grants to sustainable tech innovations. I'd spent hours polishing the application, uploading the diagrams, writing a heartfelt explanation of how the idea could help in real-world disaster zones. I hit submit, heart pounding. A week passed, then 2, then 4. Nothing. I followed up, only to be told the incubator had already chosen their finalists, and that one of the most promising submissions was for a nearly identical product. I was stunned. I asked for more information, pretending to be just curious. They wouldn't give names, but they mentioned the submission had come from a Nicholas C. I felt like I'd been punched. My chest went cold. I raced home and pulled up the incubator's website. Sure enough, there it was. A featured project called Pure Drop, credited to an N. Callahan. The prototype photo had been slightly altered, the branding slicked up, the design trimmed, but it was mine. My layout. My filtration sequence. Even the modular clip I'd invented to keep the tubing stable was identical. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. Then I called him. He picked up on the third ring. Yo, what's up? I didn't even say hello. You stole my design. There was a pause. Then, in the most casual voice imaginable, whoa, chill. I didn't steal anything. I just expanded on your idea. You took my prototype. You changed the name and submitted it. Look, man, he said, laughing now. You showed it to us at dinner. It wasn't, like, copyrighted or anything. And you weren't doing anything with it. You don't get it. This is how business works. You snooze, you lose. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred. I think I muttered something. Maybe a curse, maybe just his name, but I hung up. I sat there, numb, as the realization sank in. My brother had taken the one thing I'd built entirely on my own and sold it as his own invention. He got the grant. He got the investors. Within 6 months, he had a website, a PR firm, and 2 viral TikToks about how Pure Drop is changing the world, one drop at a time. The media ate it up. My parents? They were ecstatic. Can you believe it? Mom beamed during one call. Nick finally found his calling. Oh, Lucas, you're going to be so proud of your brother. Proud. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I swallowed it. Again, just like always. Because what was I going to do? Out him? Make my parents choose sides? Risk looking like the jealous sibling? Instead, I pulled away. I stopped visiting. Stopped calling. I kept my head down, did my work, and watched from a distance as Nick's face showed up on business panels, podcasts, and conference flyers. He bought a Tesla, then a condo, then posted a picture of himself vacationing in Santorini with the caption, "Started from the basement, now we here." Every post felt like a knife. And the worst part? No one knew. No one cared. But I never stopped watching. And I never forgot. I didn't know it yet, but the tides were already beginning to turn. All it would take was one phone call. 3 years later, that would flip the entire story on its head. And this time, I wouldn't stay quiet. If I had to pick the exact moment everything shattered, it was the night of my parents' anniversary dinner. They were celebrating 35 years together, and Mom wanted to do it big. Reserve the private room at some overpriced Italian place downtown. I almost didn't go. I'd barely spoken to Nick in over a year by then. Every time I saw his smug face on Instagram, giving motivational speeches about innovation and resilience, it made my blood boil. But Mom begged. She said it'd mean a lot to her if we were both there. So I went. I showed up 5 minutes early, old habit, and sat in the corner seat while the staff finished setting the table. A few minutes later, Nick waltzed in. Designer blazer, no tie, hairstyled like he'd just stepped out of a GQ shoot. He greeted Mom and Dad with a bear hug and a loud, "Happy anniversary, you legends." Then he looked at me like I was a waiter. "Oh," he said, smirking. "You're here." "Yeah," I replied, trying not to bite. "Shocking, right?" He chuckled, didn't respond, and immediately launched into a story about meeting some investor from Dubai who wanted to license Pure Drop tech for humanitarian efforts. Mom's eyes sparkled like she was watching a celebrity. Dad nodded, impressed. I sat in silence, sipping my water and watching them eat it up. Then he said it. "You know," Nick began, twirling pasta onto his fork with exaggerated grace. "I was thinking about starting a foundation in Dad's name. Something to give back. Sustainable tech for communities in need. I think it'd be a cool legacy." "That's a beautiful idea," Mom said, dabbing the corner of her eye with a napkin. "I mean, I wouldn't be where I am without you too," Nick said, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "I owe everything to this family." I nearly choked. The words hit like a slap. Nick owed everything to this family? No mention of me. No nod to the design he stole. No acknowledgement of the years I spent working on that prototype before he swooped in and polished it for show. I cleared my throat. "That's interesting," I said slowly. "Because when I first showed you that design, you said it looked like something out of a sci-fi movie." He froze for half a second, just enough for me to notice, then smiled. "Right. But your version wasn't viable, bro. You didn't have a business model. Or branding. I mean, be real, you were never going to take it anywhere." Mom gasped. "Nicholas." "What?" he said innocently. "I'm just being honest." I looked at my parents, waiting, hoping for one of them to say something, to defend me. But Dad just stared down at his plate, and Mom reached over to pat Nick's hand. "I know you two have your differences," she said gently, "but we're just happy you've both turned out so well." I laughed. I actually laughed. "Yeah, we turned out great." I left before dessert. That was the first time I realized something fundamental. My parents were never going to see me the way they saw him. No matter what I built. No matter how steady, how loyal, how present I was. I would always be second tier. The support beam, never the spotlight. I didn't answer their calls for a while after that. I needed space. And then came the text. From Nick. It said, "Hey, need to talk. It's important." I didn't respond. He followed up an hour later. "You probably saw the news already. I'm guessing you're enjoying this." I hadn't seen anything. I Googled his name. There it was, Pure Drop sued for patent infringement and financial misconduct. Several news articles had popped up overnight. The lawsuit had been filed by a small firm in Arizona that claimed Nick had used proprietary valve tech without licensing it. Worse, one of his former partners had come forward, claiming Nick had falsified some investor reports to inflate earnings. The golden child was cracking. Still, I said nothing. I sat with it. Let it marinate. 2 days later, he called. I didn't pick up. Then he tried my work number. My LinkedIn. Even messaged an old college friend of mine, asking if they'd heard from me. It was weird. Desperate. And then he showed up at my apartment. I opened the door to find him on the other side, looking like a ghost. Same expensive blazer, but it hung off his frame like a forgotten coat on a mannequin. His face was pale. Eyes sunken. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice hoarse. I let him in. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to hear what he had to say. We sat on opposite sides of my living room. He didn't touch the water I offered. "It's all falling apart," he said. "They froze my accounts. Investors pulled out. That lawsuit is garbage, but I don't have the resources to fight it." I crossed my arms. "Why are you telling me this?" He blinked. "Because I need your help." That made me laugh. I couldn't help it. "My help? You mean again? Like when I built Pure Drop and you just repackaged it?" He winced. "Okay. Look, I messed up. I should have given you credit. I should have cut you in." "No," I interrupted, leaning forward. "You should have respected me. But you couldn't. Because in your world, if you're not center stage, you don't exist." His silence confirmed everything. "Why now?" I asked. "Why not years ago?" "Because I didn't think I'd lose," he said softly. There it was. That was Nick in a sentence. He never apologized unless he had something to gain. He reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. "Look, I still own the rights. Technically. But I want you to come on board. As co-founder. We relaunch. Clean slate. New partners. Your designs. Your name." I stared at him. It was a tempting offer. Too tempting. For a second, I imagined it. Finally being recognized. Finally getting credit for what I'd built. But then I looked at him. This man who had burned every bridge he crossed, and now stood on the last one, soaked in gasoline. I shook my head. "I'm not interested." He looked stunned. Genuinely stunned. Like the idea of someone saying no to him had never occurred before. "But this is your chance," he said. "You'll finally be in the spotlight." "No," I replied. "This is your chance to finally be a decent person. And you blew it." He left that night without another word. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. But then something even stranger happened. My parents invited me to lunch. Just me. No Nick. I showed up, unsure of what to expect. They looked unusually serious. Not sad. Just thoughtful. "We wanted to talk to you," Dad said. "About the trust." I blinked. "The what?" "The inheritance," Mom said quietly. "Our will. We've been revising it." I stared at them. I hadn't even known they had a will. Dad cleared his throat. "We've decided that the business shares we own, along with the properties, your mother's house, and my side of the land, will be passed to you." My mouth went dry. "What?" I asked. "We love your brother," Mom said, her voice trembling slightly. "But we're not blind anymore. You've been the one holding everything together." I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know how to feel. Relief? Gratitude? Bitterness? And then came the part one wasn't ready for. "We're also giving you executor power," Dad added, "over the trust. It's around $3 million now, mostly from Mom's investments and the house value. You'll be responsible for managing it and deciding if Nick gets any." I stared at them, stunned. "Are you serious?" "We talked about it a long time," Mom said. "It was hard, but we realized we've been enabling him, and we want to make it right." I left that lunch in a daze, not just because of the money, but because, for the first time in my life, they saw me. Not as Nick's brother, not as the fixer, but as someone in control. 2 weeks later, Nick found out. He called me in a rage, said our parents were turning on him, accused me of manipulating them, of stealing what was rightfully his. I told him I didn't steal anything. I earned it, quietly, over years. That's when he said something I'll never forget. "You think you're better than me now? Just wait. You'll mess it up like you always do. You're not built for the spotlight." And then he hung up. That was the last time I heard from him, until the day he showed up on my doorstep again, broke, unemployed, and desperate. Rock bottom didn't come with a dramatic crash. It came quietly, like a slow leak in a tire you don't notice until you're stranded on the side of the road, miles from help. After that lunch with my parents and the blowout call with Nick, I thought things might finally be settling. I'd been handed something I never asked for: responsibility, trust, recognition, and I was still wrapping my head around it. But for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel hope. Like maybe I could finally breathe in a space that wasn't under my brother's shadow. But hope, it turns out, can be a dangerous thing. About 2 months after that conversation, my dad had a stroke. It was sudden and brutal. One moment, he was out back pruning Mom's hydrangeas, and the next he was on the ground, his coffee spilled in the grass, eyes wide and frozen. Mom found him minutes later and called me, hysterical. I drove over like a man possessed, heart pounding so hard I couldn't hear my own thoughts. He survived, but he was never quite the same. His speech was slurred, his memory patchy. The man who used to lecture me about engine oil viscosity now struggled to remember my name on bad days. And just like that, the weight of the family shifted again, this time squarely onto my shoulders. Mom was strong, but exhausted. She didn't ask for help, but I offered anyway. I handled the legal paperwork, followed up with the neurologist, arranged for an in-home therapist. I brought meals, repaired their water heater when it blew, paid for half the new stair lift out of pocket when the insurance company dragged their feet. I didn't think about it. I just did it. Nick didn't even show up to the hospital until day 5. When he finally arrived, it was like a storm rolled in. He hugged Mom with performative sobs, filmed part of the hospital visit for a raw, authentic moment on his now dwindling Instagram, then pulled me aside and asked if the inheritance was still locked in. I couldn't believe it. "Our father's in a hospital bed," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And you're asking about money?" He shrugged. "You don't get it. I'm underwater here, Luke. I lost my team, my accounts, my brand. You think it's easy rebuilding from scratch with your name dragged through the mud? I'm just trying to survive." "No, Nick," I said. "You're trying to cash out. That's different." He stormed off. Mom didn't notice. She was too busy holding Dad's hand and whispering stories into his ear like it would anchor him to reality. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing signs of strain in my own life. I was stretched thin, splitting time between my job, my parents, and the slowly growing pressure of being the executor of a trust that was suddenly under scrutiny from every angle. My manager at work called me in one Friday and gently asked if I was okay. My performance had slipped, deadlines missed, emails unanswered. I nodded and told her everything was fine. That was a lie. I barely slept. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, unsure if I'd left the stove on or if Dad had fallen again. I couldn't eat. My bonsai withered from neglect. Then the worst happened. I got laid off. Budget cuts, they said. Restructuring. But I knew the truth. I'd become unreliable. I couldn't blame them. I packed my desk that day in silence, drove home, and sat in the dark for hours. I didn't tell anyone, not even my parents. They had enough to worry about. That was the low point. It wasn't loud or dramatic. Just quiet. Empty. A sense that I'd poured everything I had into holding everyone else together and hadn't kept a single drop for myself. I was broke, jobless, overwhelmed, and bitter. And beneath it all, that old voice crept in, the one I thought I'd buried. Nick was right. You're not built for the spotlight. But the funny thing about rock bottom? There's nowhere left to sink. And sometimes, in that silence, you find clarity. One night, after another full day of job hunting and caregiver calls, I sat at my old drafting table. It had dust on it, hadn't touched it in months. On a whim, I opened a folder where I kept all my old project notes. Blueprints, designs, scraps of ideas I never had the time or energy to finish. That's when I found it. An early concept sketch from years ago, one I'd scribbled before Pure Drop ever had a name. It was messy and unrefined, but it had heart. The idea was a new filtration unit, one that could snap into existing infrastructure without replacing it. Modular, cheap to produce. It was meant for use in refugee camps, where full systems were too expensive or bulky to implement. I stared at it for a long time. Then I started tweaking. 1 hour turned into 3, 3 into 6. I looked up and the sun was rising. That's how it started. I built a routine. Every morning, I woke up, took care of Dad's therapy schedule, then worked on the project. No social media, no distractions, just paper, CAD software, and my stubborn brain. I gave myself deadlines, prototypes, feedback loops. I treated it like a job, even though no one was watching. Eventually, I emailed an old professor from college, Dr. Kinney. He'd always been tough, but fair, the kind of guy who never handed out praise unless it was earned. I sent him a PDF of my updated design and asked if he had time to look. He responded within 2 hours. "This is good," he wrote. "You've grown. Come talk." That conversation led to another, then to a connection at a nonprofit focused on clean water access in South Asia. They were looking for new ideas, something scalable, something real. I didn't pitch with slides or buzzwords. Just a quiet explanation, a prototype video I filmed in my bathtub, and a promise. I don't want fame. I just want it to work. They loved it. Within 3 months, they offered me a small grant to develop a field-ready version. I used the money carefully, no flash. Just materials, software, and a little part-time help from a retired engineer I met through Dad's therapist. During that time, things started changing. Mom got stronger. Dad stabilized. I found part-time consulting work to cover bills. And somehow, in the middle of all of it, I started to feel something I hadn't in years, pride. Not because someone handed me a microphone, but because I was building something real, again, on my terms. Then the article dropped. It was in a modest tech blog, one of those niche sites that covered sustainability projects. They'd heard about my prototype from the nonprofit and wanted to do a short piece. I almost turned it down, but something in me, the tired part that had been trampled for too long, said yes. The article was titled, "This Quiet Engineer May Have Just Changed the Future of Water Filtration." It wasn't viral, but it did get shared around enough to reach people. Emails trickled in, questions, encouragement, and one message, in particular, that made my stomach flip. From Nick Callahan. Subject, saw the article. "We need to talk." I didn't answer. Instead, I poured myself a cup of tea, opened my laptop, and kept building. Because here's the thing about falling. If you survive it, if you crawl through the ashes of everything you lost, you learn what you're really made of. Nick burned fast and bright. But I had something better. I had roots. Nick didn't stop with the email. That was just the opening volley. A few days later, I got a text. "Congrats on the article. Looks like the quiet nerd finally made it big." I stared at it for a long time. Not because it surprised me. Nick's sarcasm was his second language, but because it didn't sting anymore. Not the way it used to. I'd spent so long absorbing his barbs like they were gospel, but now I saw them for what they really were. Insecurity, wrapped in mockery. A desperate reach from someone used to towering over everyone else, and panicking now that he was knee-deep in quicksand. I didn't respond. So he called. It rang 7 times before I finally let it go to voicemail. A minute later, the notification buzzed. Lucas, look, I know we haven't exactly been on good terms, but I saw the article, and I'm impressed, man. Seriously, you're doing important work. Real work. I want to make things right between us. Give me a chance to talk, okay? No tricks. Just family. He always knew how to sound sincere when he needed to. I didn't delete the voicemail. I saved it. Every syllable, every carefully measured pause. Because somewhere deep in my gut, I felt it. This was the beginning of something. I didn't know what yet. But it wasn't an apology. It was a setup. And this time, I wasn't walking into anything unprepared. That night, I stayed up sketching. Not blueprints or filters, but outlines. Notes. Names. I wrote down everything Nick had ever taken from me. Not just the pure drop theft, but the years of casual sabotage. The job opportunities he torpedoed when he badmouthed me to mutual contacts. The internship he accidentally blew when he borrowed my portfolio in college and left it at a diner. Even the small things. The lies to our parents. The way he twisted every story so I looked like the selfish one. I wasn't writing it all down out of spite. I was organizing a strategy. For once, I was going to think like Nick. But smarter. More deliberate. First, I needed to understand his position. So I did some digging. Turns out, after the lawsuits, Pure Drop had collapsed hard. What remained of the company had been acquired in a quiet fire sale by a shell company based in Delaware, probably an investor group trying to salvage the patents. Nick's name had been scrubbed from most press releases, and his online presence had gone eerily quiet since the fallout. But more importantly, he was broke. Not pretend broke. Not, I downsized to a Tesla Model 3 broke. Real broke. I found public court records showing creditors chasing him for unpaid loans, back taxes, and 2 unresolved settlements from former employees. One former assistant had even filed a harassment complaint. That part didn't surprise me. Nick always had a way of making people feel small when the cameras were off. But here's where it got interesting. Buried in one of the court documents was an affidavit that mentioned Nick had sold personal assets to support a new venture in development. That meant one thing. He was trying to rise again. I knew Nick. He didn't know how to stay down. He'd claw and scratch and bluff his way back to relevance, even if it meant standing on someone else's shoulders. Again. And that's when the idea hit me. What if I gave him what he wanted? Not out of kindness, but as bait. See, I had something Nick desperately needed, credibility. He'd torched every bridge he'd ever crossed. No one trusted him. No one would invest in him. But I had a name now. A small one, but clean. Authentic. My nonprofit partner had just introduced me to a few mid-level investors looking to support ecotech projects with social impact. If Nick caught wind of that, he'd come running. So I started planting seeds. First, I posted an update to LinkedIn. A short, polished write-up of my new partnership with the nonprofit. Nothing flashy. Just a photo of me at a rural test site in India, kneeling beside one of my latest prototypes. The caption read, "Grateful to be working with people who care about impact over profit. We're just getting started." Then I updated my Twitter bio. Changed engineer to founder. That got a few retweets from sustainability influencers. Within hours, a few startup blogs reposted the image. It didn't take long. 2 days later, I got another email from Nick. "Saw your LinkedIn update. Congrats on the funding. I have an idea I think you'll love. Want to meet?" There it was. The invitation. I waited a day before replying. "Sure. Let's talk." Neutral ground. He agreed instantly. Suggested a cafe downtown. The one he used to bring dates to when he was still trying to convince people he was a humble genius. I showed up 10 minutes early, ordered an espresso, and picked a seat near the back, where I could watch the entrance. He arrived right on time. Nick looked weathered. The blazer was still expensive, but it didn't fit quite right anymore. His face had that hollow look people get when they've spent too much time pretending not to panic. He smiled when he saw me, all teeth and charm. "Lucas," he said, arms spread like we were long-lost friends. "Man, it's good to see you." I nodded. "You too." He sat down, waved off the waiter, and leaned forward. "I'll cut to the chase," he said. "I've been working on something. A new concept. Took everything I learned from Pure Drop, stripped out the fluff, and reimagined it from the ground up." He pulled a tablet from his bag and slid it toward me. I looked at the screen. It was a sleek mock-up of a filtration unit. Compact, modular, field-ready. I didn't react, because it was my design. The exact design I'd sent to Dr. Kinney months ago. He must have gotten access somehow. An old drive? A shared folder I forgot to lock. Impressive, I said calmly. Where'd you get the specs? He grinned. Let's just say inspiration struck. Point is, I've got a manufacturer lined up overseas, a buddy who still owes me a favor in marketing, and a couple early angel investors who want in. Only thing I'm missing? A clean face. He pointed at me. You're the hero now? People trust you. We combine forces, we could take this thing global. I stared at him. He genuinely thought I'd say yes. I need to think about it, I said. He nodded eagerly. Totally. Just don't wait too long. Timing's everything. We shook hands, and I left. But now I had proof. The tablet, the mock-up, the proposal, it was all the evidence I needed to show he was trying to steal my work again. Only this time, I'd invited him to do it. Documented it. Logged every interaction. I even had the cafe security footage, thanks to a quiet tip to the manager I used to know from college. Now it was time to act. I called Dr. Kinney, sent him the footage and files. This enough to void any NDA breach? I asked. He chuckled. This is enough to bury him. But I didn't want to just bury Nick. I wanted to teach him. So I kept playing along. I emailed Nick 2 days later, saying I was in. I asked for access to his investor deck, his manufacturing contacts, a timeline. He gave me everything, and I started building my own timeline, one that didn't include him. Meanwhile, I reached out to a friend in marketing, someone I trusted, and started quietly prepping a campaign. Not flashy, just precise, timed, controlled. Because if Nick was planning to launch a stolen project under a new name, I was going to beat him to it, with a better name, better partners, and the receipts to prove he'd never built a damn thing in his life. Let him think he was winning. Let him post teasers, build hype, whisper to investors. Because when the moment came, I'd be ready. And this time, I wasn't pulling punches. Nick's downfall didn't explode like a bomb. It unraveled like a bad thread, slow and irreversible, with every tug making the seams of his ego come apart. I gave him 3 weeks to play pretend. 3 weeks of emails, phone calls, forwarded contracts, eager investor updates. He even sent over an NDA for our protection. I signed it, but only after tweaking the copy on my end and logging his digital signature through a timestamp server. Legal firepower. Ironclad. Bulletproof. I wanted this revenge to be clean. Not petty. Not impulsive. Just surgical. By week 2, I had everything I needed. Screenshots, voice recordings, thanks to a call recording app I'd quietly installed, and a full copy of his investor pitch deck, which used my diagrams, my case studies, even a testimonial I'd written for the nonprofit, copied and pasted word for word. This time, Nick wasn't just stealing an idea. He was hijacking a full identity. But I waited. I watched. He booked a launch date. A modest event in a co-working space downtown, RSVP only. Supposedly exclusive, but I got in easy. My friend from marketing had been added to the invite list. She forwarded me the email with a grin and a single line. You ready? I was. I didn't sleep the night before the launch. Not from nerves, just anticipation. I'd planned this moment for months now, and every piece was finally where it belonged. The morning of the event, I sent out an email blast through my nonprofit partner's mailing list. Subject line: the real story behind the next big water tech launch. Inside was a neatly organized expose. Screenshots, timeline, voice recordings, video clips from the cafe. His email admitting the idea was mine. The investor deck with metadata traced back to my original documents. A quiet but devastating commentary about how integrity matters more than hype, and how real impact should never be stolen. It didn't smear him. It unmasked him. I scheduled it to go live at 10:15 a.m. Nick's launch began at 10. I arrived at the venue 5 minutes late. Not fashionably, strategically. The room was small, maybe 40 people. A handful of investors. A few media reps. And there, at the front, was Nick. Hair gelled. Suit tailored. Smile polished like a politician's. He was mid-sentence when he saw me walk in. His voice caught for just a second, just long enough for the silence to stretch awkwardly. Then he kept talking. I leaned against the back wall, arms crossed. So, as you'll see in this next slide, Nick continued, gesturing toward a screen. Our filtration unit isn't just efficient, it's revolutionary. Designed with adaptability in mind, it's already generating interest from multiple NGOs in Southeast Asia. He didn't get to finish the sentence, because right then, one of the investors' phones buzzed. Then another, and another. One of the reporters in the front row raised her hand. Mr. Callahan, are you aware there's a document circulating that claims you plagiarized this entire project from your brother? The room went silent. Nick blinked. What? She held up her phone. It's all over Twitter. An expose. Emails, voice recordings, patent sketches. Someone leaked it. With a lot of evidence. Nick looked like someone had just dumped a bucket of ice water over his head. No, that's fake, he stammered. Lucas is just jealous. He's been trying to sabotage me for years. Actually, said a second journalist, standing now, we just received a press release from the nonprofit you said you were partnering with. They've confirmed no affiliation with you. In fact, they called your claims fraudulent. Nick turned red. This is a setup. It's a smear campaign. He's bitter because I beat him. He gave me those designs. No, I said, finally stepping forward, my voice calm but clear. You stole them. Twice. He spun to face me. You think this makes you a hero? What? You wanted a little spotlight, so you decided to destroy everything I've built. I looked at him, really looked. He was sweating now, breathing heavy, backed into a corner with no more mirrors to hide behind. You didn't build anything, I said quietly. You copied, lied, burned every bridge. And now you're upset the truth finally caught up to you. There was a beat of silence. Then the man from the investor group spoke. We'll be withdrawing all interest in this project. Effective immediately. Nick opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Someone else stood up. A woman in marketing. And we'll be contacting legal. If you used our firm's name in a false pitch, that's fraud. Nick's mouth worked uselessly as the crowd thinned. A few people stayed behind to ask questions, but not to him. To me. Journalists. Photographers. Even one of the engineers Nick had lured into working for him reached out, handing me his card with a quiet, I think I backed the wrong brother. I left the venue without looking back. I didn't need to see Nick unravel in real time. That wasn't what this was about. I wasn't there to humiliate him. I was there to end it. The fallout was swift. Within 48 hours, Nick had lost everything. Again. But this time, it wasn't a scandal, it was exposure. His investors blacklisted him. The NGO community flagged him. His LinkedIn vanished. His Twitter turned private. A week later, I heard from my mom that he'd been staying in a cheap motel 2 towns over. She asked if I could help him. I told her gently. I already did. She didn't ask again. The nonprofit I'd partnered with formally brought me on as co-founder. We launched a pilot program in 3 countries. Donations poured in. A new name, a new site, a new mission. No noise. No flash. Just real work. One day, as I stood in a remote village watching a group of kids fill their water bottles from one of my units, a boy looked up and asked, "Did you make this?" I smiled. "Yeah, I did." He nodded, then ran back to his friends. I didn't need applause, or likes, or magazine covers. I just needed that. Nick never recovered. Maybe he'll try again someday, with a new name and another mask. Or maybe he'll finally sit with his own failure long enough to understand it. I don't know. And I don't care. Because I'm done being the quiet brother in the background. I'm done building things for other people to steal. This time, I built something no one could take from me. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the only kind of revenge that matters.